My name's Marcus Holden, and they used to call me a hero. Some still do, I guess, depending on which side of the cosmic fence you sit. For a few burning years, back when Terra fell from the skies, I was a fleet marine stationed on Ganymede. The first contact had been rough, no sugarcoating that. We weren't prepared for the Xylari, not in tech, not in tactics, and definitely not in how they saw the whole concept of war. At first, the news channels painted them with that typical alien invader brush, cold, calculating, insectal in their logic. Talking heads spun theories about dwindling resources, alien overpopulation, all those classic tropes. Turns out, reality was as far off from sci-fi flicks as a slingshot is from a star cruiser. We got a crash course in Xylari culture the hard way, in the choking dust of ambushes and the blinding flash of orbital bombardments. They didn't want our planet. They didn't see us as ants worth squashing. They were. Well, imagine if a knight in shining armor walked into a kindergarten and the kids attacked him with crayons and plastic swords. That mixture of amusement, pity, and slight annoyance? That was the Xylari attitude. You see, they were near immortal. Not in the undying, mystical sense. Their tech, their medicine, hell, their whole cell structure just outclassed ours. A bullet wound that would leave a human in the med bay for weeks barely made them flinch. It was like a bee sting to us. Regeneration, near-perfect immune systems, lifespans stretching across centuries. We were mayflies in comparison. First few battles were pure, unfiltered carnage. We hit them with everything we had, tanks, missiles, bombers, boots on the ground. They didn't fall like we expected, and for every Xylari we took out, a dozen, 100 of us went down. News reports back home turned grim, the bravado replaced with barely concealed panic. That's when the whispers started among the troops. At first, it was dark humor, jokes about getting turned into bug paste or how maybe the afterlife would be better than this hell. But soon there was a desperate edge to it, the question hanging unspoken in the air during the brief lulls in the fighting: why the heck were we even bothering? Turns out, that question reached high command a lot faster than I'd expected. One day, the order came down. We weren't retreating. We weren't going for some last-ditch, Alamo-style battle. It was worse, we were to surrender. We all thought, that the brass had lost their damn minds. But the logic, when laid out coldly on a briefing room table, was horrifyingly sound. The Xylari couldn't comprehend the concept of fighting to the last breath for a lost cause. To them, we were either too stupid to understand we were outgunned or freakishly stubborn. High Command gambled on the latter. We were gambling that the Xylari, as vastly technologically superior as they were, might possess the same condescending pity a human might have watching a bunch of ants struggling against a boot. That it was better to become an annoyance than an obstacle. Turns out, that bet saved what was left of humanity. I wish I could say I was some shining paragon of courage during the whole mess. Truth is, my defiance crumbled the moment we were told to lay down our weapons. I wasn't defiant, I was resigned. I'd seen too many friends, good people, turned into ash and scrap metal on that frozen hellhole. The actual surrender was surreal is the only word for it. No grand speeches, no defiant last stands like in the history vids. Just a long, miserable march out of our bunkers, hands raised, under the watchful eyes of Xylari who were as battle-worn and confused as we were. No shots fired, no insults, just their beady, multifaceted eyes scanning us like we were lab specimens. The prison camps weren't what you'd expect either. No barbed wire or torture chambers. They were clean, efficient, and filled to the brim with the same kind of weary hopelessness I'd seen reflected in the eyes of my fellow prisoners. Then came the interrogation. The spooks in High Command had predicted it. They'd told us, as they prepped us for surrender, that the Xylari would definitely want to know why we fought so hard when, to them, the outcome had been so obvious. It was another gamble, of course, that maybe they would take pity on us, or that they might see us as a curiosity worth preserving. My turn came sooner than I'd thought. They marched me to this stark white room, translator node shoved in my ear chirping away as it tried to parse the rapid-fire bursts of the Xylari language. The one sitting across from me could have passed for human if you squinted and ignored the chitinous plates on his face and those two bright eyes. He, or at least the translator node called it a he, had a stack of datapads and a look of clinical fascination. Subject designation Marcus Holden, correct. It chirped in an approximation of a human voice. I nodded dumbly, trying to swallow down the acid lump of fear in my throat. Your species designation, human, exhibits a curious discrepancy in its actions and apparent physiological limits. Can you expound upon the reasons for continued resistance despite the clear futility of your actions? I'd heard variations on this question a dozen times from a dozen of those bug-eyed inquisitors. Still, they wanted something, proof of intelligence, maybe proof that we weren't just mindless animals lashing out on instinct. I took a deep, shuddering breath and tried to find those lofty words I heard in speeches back on Earth. But all those notions of freedom and spirit and never giving up, they seemed hollow, useless compared to the reality of a century of servitude we were facing. Look, I started, and the translator struggled with the casualness of my tone. It's simple. We fight because that's what you do when someone comes kicking down your door, right? My captor tipped his head, mandibles twitching in what I was starting to realize was a Xylari equivalent of a frown. A predictable survival instinct, present in most species. Yet, your species knows of its biological disadvantages. The casualty analysis indicates a clear comprehension of your. He hesitated, the translator buzzing for a moment fragility. And there it was, the heart of the whole damn mess. The thing that the shiny medals and somber memorials back home would never be able to grasp. Why we fought like cornered rats, because we knew we were going to lose. We knew this wasn't bravery. It was desperation. Yeah, we knew, I snapped, the bitterness finally cutting through the numbness. We knew we were fragile. Knew we'd break, bleed, and leave behind empty bunks. That's the whole point. The Xylari stared at me, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in those multifaceted eyes. Realization dawning. Point. Yeah, I continued, finding a twisted sort of satisfaction in laying it all out. We're the guys who climb the mountain even if it means falling and shattering halfway up. We're the idiots who punch the hurricane, even though it'll knock us on our backs. It ain't about winning, hell, we knew we couldn't, it's about showing we ain't gonna just lie down and take it. Because. And here, with the translator beeping frantically in my ear, I struggled to voice the most basic and most baffling element of what it meant to be human. Because maybe, just maybe, if we make ourselves enough of a pain in the rear end, if we spill our stubborn guts all over your shiny boots, then the next time you think about invading someone, you'll remember us. And you'll hesitate. The silence that followed my little speech stretched and stretched. The Xylari officer didn't speak, just continued to stare, those insectal eyes unreadable. The translator node, after sputtering to a halt, had fallen mercifully silent. It felt like an eternity before he finally broke the stillness. A preemptive revenge strategy? A gamble for the uncertain mercy of a future enemy? His voice was flat, devoid of any inflection the translator could pick up. I just shrugged, the fight leaking out of me now that I'd said my piece. Maybe. Or maybe it's just. Well, you ever step on a bug, then feel bad about it? He twitched again, a ripple moving through the chitinous plates. And then, and maybe my exhausted mind was playing tricks, he did something no Xylari had done before in my presence. He laughed. Not the mocking, cruel laughter we'd feared, but a low, almost thoughtful chuckle that rumbled through his thorax. Insects, he said, a touch of amusement coloring the translated word, an apt analogy, human Marcus Holden. It didn't take long for word of my little interrogation outburst to pass through the vine of prisoner gossip. First whispers, then outright stories. Some painted me as a defiant fool, others as a tactical genius who had somehow tricked the Xylari into treating us better. Neither was true, of course. But it did mean that I wasn't just another face in the long line of beaten, broken humans anymore. For better or worse, I was marked. The marking became a lot more literal a few weeks later when I was hauled out of the labor barracks. We were building some vast structure of gleaming metal, its purpose unclear, and shoved into a transport shuttle. No explanations given, of course. I was starting to realize that the Xylari wasn't big on the whole prisoner's rights concept. The shuttle ride was mercifully short, ending not at another camp, but at what could only be described as a Xylari city. It was. Well, for all their tech and their disdain for our primitive ways, their architecture was a mess. Spiraling towers that seemed to defy gravity, alongside hulking, blocky buildings that looked more utilitarian than artistic. Swaths of green cut through the chrome cityscape, but it was the meticulously cultivated, geometric kind of green, not the wild sprawl of earth jungles. I was herded through the streets, a lone human amidst a throng of Xylari who were giving me the same wide-eyed stares I might give a rare zoo animal. The sense of alienness was overwhelming, and not just because of the architecture. The sense, the sounds, the very way the Xylari moved was a constant reminder that I was light years away from home, both literally and figuratively. My escort brought me to a sleek, towering structure that was more glass and metal than anything else. Inside, it was cool, sterile, and filled with the faint hum of hidden machinery. More Xylari, these ones adorned with what I guessed were symbols of academia, bustled about, their mandibles twitching with what might have been excitement. I got the distinct impression that I wasn't so much a prisoner anymore, as a particularly interesting lab specimen. They put me through the works, scans, samples, psych evaluations more thorough than anything I'd endured in military training. One particularly intense session involved prodding at my scars, both old and new. The Xylari researchers kept glancing between their data pads and me with expressions that sent shivers down my spine. It was a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a strange sort of horror. Eventually, they brought me to another sterile room, this one with a viewport looking down on a vast, arena is the only way to describe it. The floor was smooth sand, dotted with what looked like training equipment scaled for something a lot larger and meaner than a human. Subject Marcus Holden, rasped a familiar voice, you are about to participate in what we have designated a survival assessment. It was my old friend from the interrogation, looking as inscrutable as ever. Survival assessment. A shiver snaked down my spine. What exactly does that entail? The Xylari subject will engage in limited combat. Your task is to survive. Utilize the evasive and defensive techniques common to your species. My gut clenched. This wasn't a test, it was a demonstration. And judging by the size of the arena, my opponent wasn't going to be another Xylari. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, and I instinctively flinched as a massive form lumbered into the arena. It was reptilian, covered in thick armored scales, and walked on 4 clawed feet. Its slitted eyes glowed with a predatory hunger, and its maw was ringed with serrated teeth that could snap a man in half. This was what it meant then, the awe and horror in the researchers' eyes. Not just the fact that we fought, but that we did so with bodies so achingly fragile. We were lambs thrown before the wolf, and these Xylari academics had front row seats to the carnage. Begin, chirped the interrogator's voice through the speakers, with an almost gleeful lilt. The creature lunged with a speed that belied its size. I scrambled backward, the sand shifting beneath my boots. I'd been in my share of brawls, but this was like a boxer facing off against a tank. The only thing that saved me was years of ingrained combat training, honed by drills and simulations back on Earth. My mind worked faster than my body, calculating trajectories and searching for any exploitable weakness in the creature's build. A swipe of its clawed paw nearly took my head off my shoulders. I ducked under a snap of its jaws, feeling the stink of its hot breath against my skin. The training equipment became my only hope. I vaulted over a hurdle meant for something far more agile, forcing the creature to alter its path. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed. I wasn't fighting back, not really. I was buying time, precious seconds of continued existence that felt more like a taunt than a victory. The researchers watched with increasing agitation, their mandibles working furiously as if they were arguing over some unexpected result in their precious little experiment. One particularly close call, where a swipe of the creature's tail sent me sprawling, had a ripple of surprise going through the observation room. And slowly, sickeningly, I realized why. The Xylari, with their near instantaneous regeneration, had simply never encountered the concept of lasting injury. A cut, a bruise, a broken bone, these things must have been abstract notions to them, medical curiosities rather than battlefield realities. It took all my willpower not to just collapse in the sand and wait for the inevitable. Some twisted part of me was still clinging to that defiant spark I'd ranted about during my interrogation. The creature was growing frustrated, its attacks more savage and less calculated. This was my chance. I sprinted towards a scaled-up version of a climbing wall, desperately searching for purchase on the smooth, artificial surface. My fingers found a narrow ledge, and I hauled myself upwards with a strength born of desperation. The creature bellowed in fury and lunged, snapping at my heels. I kept climbing, ignoring the scream of my muscles. I reached the top of the wall just as the creature crashed into its base, the impact shaking the whole structure. I didn't look down, just scrambled over and leapt, landing gracelessly on the sand with a gasp. For just a moment there was silence. Then, the uproar from the observation deck was deafening. The Xylari were jabbering away, their voices a harsh buzz. It was a different kind of noise from before, laced with a shock that felt almost like respect. End assessment. My interrogator's voice was strained, carrying an undertone I'd never detected before. The creature below slumped back, confused but wary. Medics, Xylari medics, rushed into the arena, circling me like I was some kind of alien artifact. They examined the scrapes and bruises marring my exposed skin, their mandibles twitching with a kind of horrified fascination. They herded me away from the arena and back into the depths of their tower city. They didn't take me back to the shuttle, or to the labor barracks. My new quarters were, comfortable is the only word for it. There was a proper bed, edible food, even some kind of data terminal buzzing with incomprehensible Xylari script. They treated me like a specimen under observation, and I had the horrible feeling I knew exactly why. Our fragility, our stubborn tendency to bleed and break and keep going, wasn't just a point of pity for the Xylari anymore. It made us monstrous. It took weeks, maybe months, of solitary confinement in my gilded cage for the full impact of what was happening to sink in. The whispers in the corridors grew louder, more insistent. Not whispers of mockery now, but tinged with an uncertainty that bordered on fear. I watched with grim satisfaction as this realization spread through their ordered, efficient society. News filtered in snippets through the translator node chirping in my ear as I pretended to decipher the endless stream of information on the data terminal. The Xylari military command was in an uproar, debating whether they'd underestimated us. Invasion plans were being hastily redrawn, their forces pulling back not in defeat, but in a strategic reassessment. And at the heart of this ripple of panic? Me, Marcus Holden, Fleet Marine turned reluctant ambassador of a species deemed too dangerous to be left alone. The irony of it nearly made me choke. Then came the summons. No armed escort, no sterile examination room this time. Instead, I was led with strange deference to the highest levels of their metropolis, to the sleek spire that I suspected held their ruling council. The chamber within was less a room and more a vast, circular amphitheater, Xylari dignitaries filling the curved benches in their hundreds, their lidless eyes fixed on me with chilling intensity. My interrogator, the one now elevated to the dubious position of my liaison, stood off to the side. Human Marcus Holden, he announced, his segmented body unusually still. You stand before the Xylari High Conclave. They seek clarification on certain matters pertaining to your species. No speeches from me this time. They wanted more than my defiant ramblings. They wanted the cold, hard facts that had been neatly edited out of their initial invasion strategy. I stood at the center of their grand chamber, the lone human among countless aliens, and systematically shredded the remaining facade of their superiority. I told them of our wars, not the glorious struggles found in history vids, but the petty squabbles over resources and ideology, the brutality and senseless loss we inflicted upon ourselves. I told them of our diseases, the myriad of ways our fragile bodies could fail, betray, and crumble. I painted vivid pictures of cancer cells ravaging young bodies, of pandemics sweeping through crowded cities, the agonizing decay of old age. The chamber was eerily silent as the translator echoed my words. Disgust warred with a reluctant fascination on their chitinous faces. Some averted their gaze, as if confronted with a sight too gruesome to behold. Yet, none left, and none interrupted. I'd become their horror story, the whispered cautionary tale around campfires on their homeworld. Then, hesitantly at first, the questions came. How many of your kind perish in such ways? From the internal failures of the body? One counselor asked, his voice a strained buzz. I gave them the numbers, percentages of death by disease, accident, the toll taken by the cruel passage of time. Their mandibles twitched with a mixture of revulsion and a cold, pragmatic analysis. Your entire species is. Another council member's voice trailed off, as if unable to find the word. Mortal, I finished for him. From the moment we're born, we're dying. It's a race against time we all lose in the end. Another round of questions, this time laced with morbid curiosity. How did we cope? Why did we bother? How could a species fighting a constant war against its own inevitable demise find the will to fight anything else? I didn't sugarcoat my answers. Because it's in our nature, I told them. To cling to warmth despite knowing it will eventually fade. To love, to build, to dream, even with the specter of our limited time hanging over us. And that, I concluded, meeting the gaze of every Xylari in the chamber, is why we are more dangerous than you ever imagined. And here's the twist, the moment the translator relayed those words, the change in the atmosphere of the room was palpable. Fear curdled into something far more insidious, determination. One of the elder Xylari, adorned with intricate markings I'd never seen before, stood up slowly. The human's words hold a macabre truth. Yet, we are Xylari. We adapt. We overcome. His multifaceted eyes gleamed with a new, calculating light. This mortality of yours. If it is the source of your stubborn spirit, then perhaps it is an affliction that can be cured. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature-controlled room. They'd flipped it. Our greatest weakness was now, in their eyes, a strength to be harnessed, twisted into a tool for their own purposes. Their researchers would descend upon our bodies, our genetic code, with the same relentless efficiency once reserved for invasion strategy. They would dissect our mortality, not out of pity or horror anymore, but a desperate hunger to replicate it. Because a short, brutal lifespan bred warriors, and the Xylari, faced with the existential threat of a defiant, dying species, craved nothing more than to turn themselves into us. My role shifted, from specimen to strategist. They pumped me for every bit of knowledge on human warfare, our tactics, our psychology. It was an unsettling inversion. I was helping craft the playbook for our own subjugation. With each classified briefing I attended, each scenario I laid out for their gleaming-eyed generals, I was twisting the knife deeper. They were quick learners, the Xylari. Not just in technology, but in the subtleties of conflict that defied brute force. They parsed propaganda, studied historical turning points, analyzed the frailties of the human mind that we ourselves used as weapons. They wanted every dirty trick, every desperate gamble we'd ever used to survive against the odds. My new quarters became a grim echo of the fleet command centers I'd known back on Earth. I pored over Xylari troop movements, their newly designed weapons, crude and inefficient in comparison to their regular arsenal, but tailored for maximum damage against soft, breakable targets. Those first horrifying skirmishes on Ganymede had been a prelude. Now they prepared for war in earnest. What they underestimated, what perhaps I purposefully obscured, was the truly dark heart of humanity. Yes, we fight with inspiring courage when pushed to the brink. But there is another side to the tapestry of our survival, the desperation that twists brilliance into cruelty. I held that part back, locked it away from their probing minds. I told them of our resilience, but not of the scorched earth policies, the sacrifice of innocence for strategic gains, the cold calculations made in dimly lit war rooms. For deep down, a flicker of hope remained within me, a flawed, irrational hope that if I showed them only our valor and not our monstrous depths, they might still turn away. The Xylari invasion plans were remade, redrawn with lethal precision that left a chill in my blood. No longer mere conquest, but targeted strikes meant to cripple our infrastructure, to plunge us into a chaos of our own making. They would unleash weapons designed to inflict not clean deaths, but agonizing, drawn-out suffering. Their medical advancements, once marvels, would be warped into methods of interrogation surpassing any human nightmare. The whispers of rebellion reached me even in my isolation. Word of imminent invasion. Calls for desperate, last-ditch resistance. Humanity was waking up to the true horror of what we had unleashed, to the monster we had created in the guise of an ally. And yet, on their Grand Council sessions, the Xylari debated. Not the morality of their actions, but the efficiency. Their newfound obsession with mortality, with waging war the human way, had introduced an element of chaos they hadn't calculated. This unpredictability of the human spirit, one exasperated counselor buzzed, it introduces too many unknown variables. It's inefficient. Yet, it was this very unpredictability that forced us to re-evaluate in the first place, countered another, a younger one, I thought. Perhaps true conquest lies not in breaking their bodies, but their spirit. To show the futility of fighting not with force, but by mirroring their own destructive nature back at them. The argument raged on. To my surprise, the tide within the council began to shift. There was a hesitancy now, a realization dawning that perhaps becoming their own worst enemy wasn't the strategic masterstroke they'd envisioned. The Xylari, for all their relentless logic and dispassionate analysis, were faltering at the face of a concept they'd never truly grasped, the sheer, irrational breadth of what humans will do to survive. And then, like a ripple in a still pond, came a proposition so bold, so unexpected, that it silenced the council chamber. A demonstration, rasped an elder, his voice echoing in the tense silence. We stage a limited invasion, not of Earth, but a smaller target. A human colony vulnerable enough to subdue, yet defended enough for them to exhibit the full scope of their resistance. And what, another councillor chimed in, a hint of disgust lacing his tone, do you propose we do with this demonstration? The elder's multifaceted eyes glittered unnervingly. Observe. If they break, if they fall to infighting and despair, then we proceed with full invasion. But if they... He paused, mandibles working soundlessly. If they rise to this darkness we seek to emulate, then perhaps there is wisdom in withdrawal. A species that turns its worst traits into a weapon is not conquered, it is unleashed. The chamber erupted in argument once more, but this time, the tide had turned. The fascination had soured, replaced by a creeping unease. And as the Xylari debated the fate of humanity, and perhaps their own, I stood among them. Not as a prisoner or a strategist, but as a testament to the terrible truth. Some monsters should remain locked away, and the key thrown far, far out of reach. I left their world as quietly as I'd come. No grand send-offs, no speeches, just the cold emptiness of a transport shuttle. Back on Earth, the changes were stark. No more careless squabbles. Our age-old divisions now seemed petty in the shadow of the newfound threat. It was unity born not from optimism, but from the grim, desperate knowledge of what awaited us in the stars. I'd won, in a sense, the Xylari had retreated, leaving us to stew in the consequences of our actions. But it was a victory that tasted like ashes. Because sometimes, the greatest danger doesn't come from outside forces, but from the chilling reflection we see staring back at us from the darkness.